The gavel didn't just bang, it exploded like a gunshot, signaling the end of a life. In the humid, wood-paneled courtroom of Judge Harrison Sterling, justice wasn't blind. It was bought, sold, and selectively applied. When Marcus Thorne was dragged in, wearing a torn hoodie and handcuffs, Judge Sterling saw exactly what he wanted to see. Another statistic, another thug to crush beneath his heel. He mocked Marcus's clothes. He laughed at his silence. He set a bail so high it was a death sentence. But Sterling made one fatal calculation error. The man standing before him wasn't a helpless drifter. He was a senior special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, wired for sound and video, and he was currently conducting the biggest sting operation in state history. The hunter had just become the prey. The air in the Oak Creek County Courthouse was thick, smelling faintly of lemon polish and stale sweat. It was a suffocating atmosphere, deliberately maintained by the man sitting on the high bench. Judge Harrison P. Sterling didn't believe in vigorous air conditioning. He believed sweat made defendants desperate, and desperate men took plea deals. Sterling was a man of 60, with silver hair coiffed into a perfect helmet of authority, and a face that naturally settled into a sneer. He adjusted his silk robe, glancing at the gold Rolex peeking out from his sleeve, a gift from a friend in the private prison sector. He was the king of this little kingdom, a rural jurisdiction where the good old boy network wasn't just a rumor. It was the law. "Next case," Sterling drawled, his voice dripping with boredom. The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller, who enjoyed gripping prisoners' arms tight enough to bruise, shoved the next defendant through the swinging gate. Marcus Thorne stumbled slightly, but caught his balance. To the casual observer, Marcus looked like a wreck. He was a tall black man, broad-shouldered, but his posture was slumped. He wore a faded, dirt-stained grey hoodie, baggy jeans that were fraying at the hems, and work boots that had seen better days. There was a fresh scrape on his cheekbone, a souvenir from the resisting arrest charge Officer Miller had slapped on him earlier that morning. But if anyone had looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed that Marcus's eyes weren't fearful. They were sharp, calculating. They were scanning the room, noting the position of the stenographer, the bored look of the district attorney, Leonard Vance, and the way Judge Sterling looked at him like he was something scraped off a shoe. "Docket number 44B, the clerk announced. State versus Marcus Thorne. Charges: aggravated loitering, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct." Sterling leaned back, tenting his fingers. He didn't look at the file. He looked at Marcus. He let the silence stretch, a power move he used to make grown men squirm. "Aggravated loitering," Sterling chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "That's a fancy way of saying you were standing somewhere you didn't belong, isn't it, son?" Marcus remained silent. He kept his hands clasped in front of him. Inside the collar of his dirty hoodie, a microscopic button camera was capturing the judge's face in 4K resolution. "I asked you a question," Sterling barked, his smile vanishing. "I was waiting for the bus, Your Honor," Marcus said. His voice was deep, calm, and surprisingly articulate. Sterling raised an eyebrow. The diction surprised him, but he quickly dismissed it. "Waiting for the bus? In a residential neighborhood? At 10 in the morning? I assume you're unemployed. Men with jobs are usually at them by 10. District Attorney Vance, a weaselly man with a receding hairline, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant was observed casing parked cars. When Officer Miller approached him, the defendant became belligerent." "I see," Sterling said, picking up a pen and twirling it. "Another drifter looking for a quick score. You people come through my town thinking our property is yours for the taking. You people?" Marcus didn't flinch, but the recording device taped to his chest picked up the sudden spike in his heart rate. He needed this. He needed Sterling to be exactly who the rumor said he was. "I have a job, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly. "Selling loose cigarettes doesn't count as a career, Mr. Thorne," Sterling interrupted, playing to the chuckling gallery of court regulars. "Do you have counsel, or are we wasting the taxpayers' money on a public defender?" A harried-looking young woman in an ill-fitting suit stood up from the side table. "Sarah Jenkins for the defense, Your Honor. We ask for a dismissal. The probable cause for the stop is non-existent. My client was standing at a marked bus stop." Sterling waved his hand as if swatting a fly. "Denied. Sit down, Miss Jenkins. You're new here, so I'll teach you a lesson. In my courtroom, the officer's word is gold. If Officer Miller says he was casing cars, he was casing cars." The judge leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Marcus. "You're a big fellow, intimidating. I bet you scared the hell out of the nice families on that street. I don't like bullies in my town." The irony was thick enough to choke on. The arraignment proceeded with the speed of a butcher chopping meat. Judge Sterling wasn't interested in the law. He was interested in processing bodies. "Mr. Vance, what is the state seeking?" Sterling asked. Vance smirked. Given the defendant's lack of local ties, his belligerence toward law enforcement, and the potential flight risk, the state requests bail be set at $10,000. Ms. Jenkins, the public defender, audibly gasped. $10,000 for a loitering charge? Your Honor, that is exorbitant. My client has $40 in his pocket. That is effectively a remand without bail. It's unconstitutional." Sterling slammed the gavel down. Bang! "Watch your tone, Ms. Jenkins, or I'll find you in contempt. I decide what is constitutional in this room." Sterling turned his gaze back to Marcus. He seemed to take pleasure in the moment, savoring the power he held over this man's life. "You know, looking at you," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost friendly tone that was far more terrifying than his shouting. "I see a pattern. Unwashed, disrespectful. Probably haven't paid taxes in a decade. You think because you're big and strong you can do what you want? Not here." Sterling scribbled on the docket. $10,000 is too low, Mr. Vance. This man resisted arrest. He assaulted the dignity of this court by showing up looking like that. He gestured vaguely at Marcus's hoodie. "Bail is set at $50,000 cash," Sterling announced. The courtroom went silent. Even Officer Miller looked surprised. $50,000 for a misdemeanor was unheard of. It was illegal. It was a violation of the 8th Amendment. "Your Honor!" Jenkins shouted. "One more word, and you're in a cell next to him," Sterling snapped. He looked at Marcus, expecting tears, begging, or an outburst of rage. That's what he wanted. He wanted Marcus to lash out so he could add an assault charge. Instead, Marcus slowly raised his head. He looked Judge Sterling dead in the eye. The expression wasn't one of defeat. It was a look of cold, hard pity. 50,000, Marcus repeated, for waiting for a bus. For being a menace to society, Sterling corrected, his face reddening. And if you can't pay it, you'll sit in the county lockup until trial, which, looking at my calendar, looks like about 6 months from now. Sterling grinned. Welcome to Oak Creek, boy. Bailiff, take him away. Officer Miller grabbed Marcus's arm, digging his thumb into the tricep. Let's go, tough guy. As Marcus was led away, he didn't struggle. He walked with a fluid, military precision that was at odds with his ragged appearance. As he passed the prosecution table, he glanced at the court stenographer's laptop, noting the time. 10:42 a.m. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now Marcus just had to survive the cage he had voluntarily walked into. The holding cell in the basement of the courthouse was a concrete box designed to break the human spirit. It smelled of urine and mildew. There were no windows, only a single flickering fluorescent bulb caged in wire mesh. Officer Miller shoved Marcus inside and slammed the iron door. "Don't get too comfortable, Thorne, or actually do. You're going to be here a long time." Marcus waited until the heavy footsteps faded down the hallway. He sat on the metal bench, careful to keep his back to the camera in the corner of the ceiling. He reached under his hoodie and tapped the small device taped to his sternum 3 times. It was a signal. Status green. Proceeding. He wasn't alone in the cell. In the far corner, curled up in a ball, was a skinny white kid, no older than 19. He looked terrified. Marcus kept his voice low. "Rough day?" The kid jumped, eyes wide. I didn't do it. I swear." "Didn't do what?" Marcus asked, leaning back against the cold wall. "They said I stole tools from a construction site," the kid whispered. "Judge Sterling. He knows my dad. My dad owes money to the bank. Sterling is on the board of the bank. He set my bail at 20 grand. I can't pay that." Marcus's eyes narrowed. This was the pattern. Sterling wasn't just a racist, he was a predator who fed on the weak, regardless of color, though he certainly had his favorites to target. He was using his gavel to settle scores and feed the private prison system, likely receiving kickbacks for every head he filled a bed with. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Billy," the kid said. "Listen to me, Billy," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a command frequency he usually reserved for tactical teams. "Don't sign anything. Don't plead guilty. Just hold on." "Why?" Billy wiped his nose. "Nobody cares about us. Sterling is God in this town." "Gods bleed," Marcus said softly, "and false idols fall." Marcus closed his eyes, mentally reviewing the dossier on Judge Harrison Sterling. Target: Harrison P. Sterling. Allegations: racketeering, federal civil rights violations, money laundering, wire fraud. Evidence required: direct confirmation of bias and abuse of power on record. Status: acquired. But Marcus needed more. He needed the corruption to be undeniable. He needed Sterling to explicitly violate a federal agent's rights. He needed the hard karma to be legally watertight. He checked his internal clock. His team, a specialized unit from the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section, was parked in a surveillance van 2 blocks away. They were listening to everything. Agent Thorne to Alpha Team, he thought, though he couldn't speak. I'm going to push him. Tomorrow, I'm going to make him lose control. The door to the cell block rattled open. It wasn't the bailiff this time. It was a man in a sharp suit, a private attorney. But not for Marcus. The lawyer walked up to the bars and looked at Billy. "Your dad sent me. He sold his truck. He's got the bond money." Billy scrambled up, looking relieved. The lawyer looked at Marcus with disdain. "Don't get your hopes up, pal. Nobody's coming for you." Marcus just smiled, a wolfish baring of teeth. You'd be surprised who's coming for whom. As Billy was led out, Marcus was left alone in the silence. He stood up and began to pace. He wasn't trapped. He was infiltrating. He stripped off the dirty outer hoodie, revealing a slightly cleaner t-shirt underneath. He needed to prepare his defense. Not a legal defense. He wasn't going to argue the law with a man who ignored it. He was going to stage a performance. He would represent himself. Pro se. That would give him the right to cross-examine. It would give him the right to speak directly to Sterling. Tomorrow, the poor black defendant was going to put the judge on trial, and Sterling wouldn't even realize it until the handcuffs were clicking shut. The next morning, the courtroom was even hotter than before. The air conditioner had ostensibly broken down, a common occurrence when Judge Sterling wanted to rush through the docket. When Marcus was brought in, he looked worse than the day before. He had deliberately rubbed dirt on his face and messed up his hair. He walked with a slight limp, feigning an injury from the night in the cell. Judge Sterling looked down from his bench, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. He looked refreshed, rested, and ready to ruin lives. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, skipping the pleasantries, "I understand you have an application to make?" Marcus stood up, gripping the defense table. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to fire my lawyer." Ms. Jenkins, the public defender, looked relieved. She knew this ship was sinking and didn't want to be on it. Sterling laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You want to represent yourself? Pro se? Son, do you even know what that means? You have a fool for a client." "I know my rights," Marcus mumbled, keeping his head down. "I want to question the officer." He lied. Sterling exchanged a look with District Attorney Vance. They were practically telepathic. This was going to be entertainment. Watching an uneducated drifter try to play lawyer was Sterling's favorite spectator sport. "Very well," Sterling said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Motion granted. Ms. Jenkins, you are excused. Mr. Thorne, you may proceed. But be warned, I will not tolerate nonsense. You have 5 minutes." Officer Miller took the stand, looking bored. He chewed gum, a violation of court decorum that Sterling ignored. Marcus shuffled his papers, blank pages he had found in the cell trash. He approached the stand. "Officer Miller," Marcus said, his voice shaky, "you said I was casing cars." "That's right," Miller said, smirking at the jury box, though there was no jury today. "Looking in windows, checking handles." "Did you see me touch a car?" Marcus asked. "I saw you thinking about it," Miller quipped. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Sterling chuckled along. "So, you arrested me for thinking?" Marcus asked. "Objection," Vance shouted. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Sterling ruled immediately. "Move on, Thorne. Stop wasting my time." Marcus paused. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, is it a crime to stand on a sidewalk in this town if you're black?" The room went dead silent. Sterling's face turned a violent shade of purple. He leaned over the bench, his eyes bulging. "You listen to me, you piece of garbage. In my town, it's a crime to be a parasite. I don't care what color you are, though your kind certainly seems to have a knack for trouble. You are here because you don't belong here. You are here because I say you are here." "Because you say?" Marcus repeated, his voice suddenly losing its tremor. It became clearer, stronger. "So, the law is whatever you decide it is." "In this courtroom, I am the law," Sterling roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "I am the alpha and the omega of your miserable little life. And for that little outburst, I'm holding you in contempt. That's another 30 days added to your sentence." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He reached into his pocket. Officer Miller's hand went to his taser. "Don't move!" Miller shouted. Marcus slowly pulled out a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He put them on. The transformation was subtle, but terrifying. The slump in his shoulders vanished. His chin lifted. The drifter was gone. In his place stood a man of intellect and lethal capability. "The law," Marcus said, his voice projecting to the back of the room with the resonance of a seasoned prosecutor, "is not subject to your ego, Harrison, and neither is the United States Constitution." Sterling blinked, confused by the sudden change in tone. "What did you just call me?" "I called you Harrison," Marcus said, calmly, "because Your Honor implies a respect you surrendered a long time ago." Judge Sterling stood up, trembling with rage. "Bailiff, seize him! Gag him! I want him in solitary confinement until he rots." Officer Miller lunged forward, reaching for Marcus. Marcus moved with a speed that blurred the air. He sidestepped Miller's clumsy grab, pivoting on his heel. With a precise, fluid motion, he swept Miller's legs out from under him and pinned the large officer to the floor, using a minimal-effort joint lock. "Stay down, Miller," Marcus said, his voice cold iron. "You are currently assaulting a federal officer." The courtroom gasped. The stenographer stopped typing. District Attorney Vance dropped his pen. Sterling looked down at the scene, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on land. "Federal? What? You're insane. You're a lunatic." Marcus stood up, smoothing his dirty hoodie as if it were an Armani suit. He turned to face the bench. He reached into his waistband, not for a weapon, but for the badge wallet he had concealed in a hidden lining. He flipped it open. The gold shield of the FBI gleamed under the courtroom lights. "Special Agent Marcus Thorne," he announced, his voice ringing out. "Department of Justice, Public Integrity Section, Organized Crime and Corruption Task Force." Sterling fell back into his chair, his face draining of color. This is entrapment. You can't do this." "It's not entrapment, Harrison," Marcus said, walking toward the bench. The scared defendant was gone. The predator had arrived. Entrapment is inducing you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit. I didn't make you deny my bail. I didn't make you violate my civil rights. I didn't make you admit on the record, twice, that you use your court to target people based on bias. Marcus tapped his chest. "I'm wearing a wire, Harrison, and a camera. We have been broadcasting live to the DOJ field office in Chicago for the last 24 hours. "Vance!" Sterling shrieked, looking at the DA. "Do something!" Vance was already backing away, hands raised. I didn't know, Judge. I just prosecute what the police bring me. I have nothing to do with this." "You requested the $50,000 bail, Vance," Marcus said, without looking at him. "You're named in the indictment, too. Conspiracy to deprive rights under color of law, RICO predicate acts, wire fraud." Sterling tried to rally. He was a powerful man. He had friends. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is my county. Get out of my courtroom." "Your courtroom?" Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Harrison, I've been investigating you for 8 months. I know about the kickbacks from the Sunrise Private Correctional Facility. I know about the consulting fees paid to your wife's shell company. I know about the illegal seizure of assets from defendants like Billy, whose father's truck you're currently driving." Sterling's eyes went to the window, perhaps looking for escape. "Don't bother," Marcus said. "I didn't come alone." The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from oppressive heat to a razor-sharp tension that pricked the skin. Judge Harrison P. Sterling stood behind his high bench, his chest heaving with the exertion of his own rage. He had just ordered the seizure of a man he believed to be a destitute, helpless drifter. He expected fear. He expected begging. What he got was a smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the baring of teeth by a predator who had finally cornered its prey. Marcus Thorne, the man in the dirty hoodie, didn't cower. He stood taller, his spine straightening with a military precision that shed the slacker persona, like a snake shedding dead skin. "Bailiff!" Sterling shrieked, his voice cracking. "I said seize him. I want him in irons. I want him in the hole." Officer Miller, the burly, sadistic bailiff who had spent years bullying teenagers and handcuffs-bound defendants, grinned. He cracked his knuckles and stepped off the wall. "With pleasure, Your Honor." Miller lunged. He didn't go for a standard arrest hold. He swung a heavy, meaty fist aimed at the back of Marcus's head. A compliance strike meant to knock a suspect senseless so they could be dragged away quietly. The courtroom gasped. The public defender, Ms. Jenkins, covered her eyes. But the blow never landed. In a blur of motion too fast for the stenographer to track, Marcus pivoted on his left heel. He caught Miller's wrist in mid-air, his grip like a steel vice. With a sharp, fluid twist of his hips, Marcus used Miller's own momentum against him. He stepped in, drove his shoulder into the bailiff's solar plexus, and executed a flawless Seoi Nage shoulder throw. 250 pounds of corrupt law enforcement went airborne. Miller slammed into the floorboards with a bone-rattling crack that shook the defense table. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gurgle. Before Miller could even try to scramble up, Marcus was on him. He didn't strike the officer. He simply applied a joint lock to Miller's elbow that froze the man in pure agony. "Stay down," Marcus commanded. His voice wasn't the mumble of a drifter anymore. It was the projected, authoritative baritone of a man accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. "If you move, I will snap this arm. Do you understand?" Miller, eyes wide with shock and pain, tapped the floor frantically with his free hand. The courtroom was frozen in stunned silence. The only sound was the humming of the overhead lights and Judge Sterling's ragged breathing. Sterling stared down at the scene, his brain unable to process the inversion of reality. The rabbit had just taken down the wolf. You assaulted an officer," Sterling sputtered, pointing a shaking finger. "That's a felony. That's 20 years. I'll see you buried under the jail. Everyone in this room is a witness." Marcus slowly released Miller, shoved him away, and stood up. He smoothed the front of his dirty grey hoodie. Then, with deliberate, agonizing slowness, he reached into the waistband of his baggy jeans. Officer Miller, still on the floor, reached for his taser. "He's got a gun! He's reaching!" "Don't be stupid, Miller," Marcus said calmly. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a black leather bifold wallet. Marcus flipped it open. The gold badge inside caught the courtroom lights, flashing like a beacon of judgment. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was unmistakable. "Special Agent Marcus Thorne," he announced, his voice ringing off the back walls. "United States Department of Justice, Public Integrity Section, Organized Crime and Corruption Task Force." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a kingdom collapsing. Sterling blinked. He slumped back into his leather chair, the blood draining from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. "Federal... what?" "No. You're a bum. You were loitering." "I was conducting surveillance, Harrison," Marcus said. He walked toward the bench, crossing the bar, the symbolic barrier between the public and the court, without asking permission. He was in charge now. "Surveillance?" Sterling whispered. Marcus tapped the center of his chest. "I'm wearing a wire, Harrison. A high-fidelity, clumsy mic with a 10-hour battery life. And the button on my hoodie, that's a 4K lens." Marcus pointed to the corner of the ceiling. "We've been live-streaming this entire proceeding to the DOJ field office in Chicago. The United States Attorney for the Northern District has been watching you for the last 45 minutes. Sterling looked at the camera lens, horror dawning in his eyes. He realized exactly what he had said on record. "I decide what is constitutional. I don't care what color you are, though your kind certainly seems to have a knack for trouble. I am the law." You can't do this," Sterling stammered, looking for an angle, a loophole, anything. "This is entrapment. You tricked me. You dressed like that on purpose to provoke me." "I dressed like a citizen," Marcus corrected, his voice icy. "A citizen with constitutional rights. I didn't force you to mock my poverty. I didn't force you to set an illegal $50,000 bail. I didn't force you to admit that you use your gavel to generate profit for your private prison partners." District Attorney Vance, sitting at the prosecution table, suddenly stood up. He grabbed his briefcase, his face slick with sweat. I have to go. I have a meeting. Judge, I had no part in this bail determination. I was just following your lead. Sit down, Leonard, Marcus barked, not even turning his head. You're not going anywhere. Vance froze. But I'm not the one you need to worry about, Marcus said, turning back to Sterling. He raised his wrist to his mouth, speaking into the hidden microphone in his cuff. Alpha Team to control. The trap is sprung. Identify confirmed subject Harrison Sterling. Execute warrant package A. Go loud. Order the raid. The response was immediate and terrifying. The heavy double oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they exploded inward. A battering ram hit the lock with a thunderous boom, splintering the wood. Federal agents! Get down! Get down! 12 tactical operators in full body armor poured into the room like a black tide. They carried carbines at the low ready. Their movements were synchronized, lethal, and overwhelming. FBI, nobody move! The courtroom gallery erupted into chaos. Spectators screamed and ducked under benches. The court stenographer dove beneath her desk. Secure the exits, shouted the team leader, a formidable woman named Commander Rodriguez. I want the building locked down. Nobody leaves without a federal ID. 2 agents sprinted toward the prosecution table. District Attorney Vance threw his hands in the air, sobbing. I surrender. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. They spun him around, slamming him against the table. The clack-clack of zip ties, tightening around his wrists, echoed through the room. But the main focus was the bench. Commander Rodriguez and 2 other agents marched up the center aisle, their boots stomping a rhythm of doom on the hardwood floor. They headed straight for Judge Sterling. Sterling stood up, clutching his gavel like a talisman, as if the piece of wood could protect him from the federal government. This is my courtroom, he screamed, his voice high and hysterical. You have no jurisdiction. I am an elected official. I demand you leave. Marcus stepped aside, allowing Rodriguez to take the lead. Harrison P. Sterling, Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the noise. You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and extortion. You can't arrest a judge on the bench, Sterling yelled. It's illegal. Sheriff! Sheriff, arrest these people. He looked toward the side door where the county sheriff usually stood. The door opened, but it wasn't the sheriff. It was 2 more FBI agents, leading the sheriff out in handcuffs. Sterling's knees buckled. Step down from the bench, Harrison, Marcus said softly. The show is over. Sterling didn't move. He couldn't. He was paralyzed by the total collapse of his ego. Rodriguez didn't wait. She vaulted over the railing with athletic ease. She grabbed Sterling by the shoulder of his silk robe and hauled him out of his chair. Get your hands off me, Sterling shrieked. Do you know who I am? I know the governor. I own this town. You own nothing, Rodriguez said. She spun him around and pushed him face first onto the desk, the same desk where he had signed hundreds of unjust warrants. Hands behind your back, Sterling struggled, thrashing like a child. No, no, I am the law. Rodriguez forced his arms back. The handcuffs clicked shut. It was a final, metallic sound that signified the end of an era of terror in Oak Creek. She hauled him up. Sterling's expensive robe was twisted. His hair, usually perfect, was hanging in his eyes. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Read him his rights, Rodriguez ordered one of her agents. You have the right to remain silent, the agent began, reciting the Miranda warning that Sterling had heard thousands of times but never thought would apply to him. Anything you say can and will be used against you. As they marched Sterling down the steps of the bench, he passed Marcus. Sterling stopped it. He looked at the black man in the hoodie, the man he had called a menace. Why? Sterling whispered. tears of rage and humiliation streaming down his face. "Why me? Why come here?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. The air between them crackled. "Because of Billy," Marcus said. Sterling looked confused. "Who?" "The kid you locked up yesterday," Marcus said, "and the hundreds before him. You thought they didn't matter because they were poor. You thought no one would notice if you crushed them." Marcus leaned in close. "But you forgot the one thing every bully eventually learns, Harrison." "What?" Sterling choked out. "There is always a bigger fish," Marcus said, "and you just got swallowed." "Get him out of here," Marcus signaled. As the agents dragged the screaming judge toward the exit, the courtroom remained in a state of shock. The aftermath in the courtroom, Marcus turned to the rest of the room. The silence was absolute. Officer Miller was still on the floor, handcuffed by another agent. He was weeping openly, terrified of what lay ahead. Marcus walked over to the defense table where Ms. Jenkins, the public defender, was still cowering. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and awe. "It's okay, Ms. Jenkins," Marcus said gently. "You can stand up." She slowly got to her feet. Agent Thorne? Is that real?" "It's real," Marcus said. "I apologize for the deception. I needed you to react naturally to his bias. You did a good job trying to defend me. You were the only person in this room who tried to follow the law." He was going to destroy you," she whispered. "He tried," Marcus said. Marcus then turned to the gallery. In the back row, standing amidst the chaos, was Billy's father. The old man was clutching his hat in his hands, staring at Marcus with a look of disbelief. Marcus nodded to him. "Sir?" The old man swallowed hard. "Yes?" "Your son," Marcus said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Billy, he's in the basement, holding cell." Yes, sir." Marcus turned to Commander Rodriguez. "Commander, I want the holding cells opened. I want every detainee processed by Judge Sterling in the last 48 hours released pending federal review. Specifically, a young man named Billy. Release him on his own recognizance immediately." Rodriguez nodded. "Copy that. Agents, move to the basement. Secure the records and release the non-violent detainees." Billy's father let out a sob. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulder shaking. Suddenly, a slow clapping started. It was the court stenographer. She had crawled out from under her desk. She stood up, wiping her glasses, and clapped. Then Ms. Jenkins joined in. Then the few citizens in the back. Even the sheriff's deputies who hadn't been arrested joined in, relieved that the tyrant who had forced them to do his dirty work was finally gone. The applause grew louder, swelling into a roar that filled the wood-paneled room. It wasn't just applause for Marcus. It was the sound of a community exhaling after holding its breath for years. Marcus didn't bow. He didn't smile. He simply walked over to the prosecution table, picked up the file regarding his own arrest, and ripped it in half. He tossed the pieces into the trash can. "Case dismissed," he said to himself. He walked toward the exit, his team flanking him. As he pushed through the broken double doors, the sun from the lobby hit his face. He pulled the earpiece from his pocket and reinserted it. "Thorne to command," he said, his voice steady. "Target is secure. The infection has been excised. We are Code 4. "Copy that, Thorne," the voice in his ear replied. "Good work. We have the forensic accountants moving on the assets now. We found the offshore accounts. Sterling is going to die in prison." "Roger that," Marcus said. He stepped out onto the courthouse steps. A crowd was already gathering, drawn by the convoy of black SUVs and the sight of their untouchable judge being shoved into the back of a federal transport van. Sterling was pressed against the window of the van, screaming silently at the glass. Marcus watched the van drive away. He felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see Billy, who had just been run up from the basement by an agent. The kid looked bewildered, blinking in the sunlight. When he saw Marcus, really saw him, the suit, the badge, the command he held over the scene, Billy's jaw dropped. "You," Billy stammered. "You're the guy in the cell." "I am," Marcus said. "You told me to hold on," Billy said. "You told me gods bleed." Marcus looked at the vanishing transport van. "They do, Billy, and false idols fall hard." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to the kid. "If anyone gives you trouble, anyone, you call that number. That's my direct line at the DOJ." Billy took the card like it was made of gold. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Marcus said. "Just go home and stay out of trouble." "Yes, sir." As Marcus walked toward his own unmarked SUV, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the cold satisfaction of the job. He had played the part of the victim to save the victims. He had let himself be mocked, manhandled, and belittled to get the evidence that no one else could get. He opened the car door and looked back at the courthouse one last time. The flag on top of the pole snapped in the wind. It looked a little brighter today. "Let's go," Marcus said to his driver. "We have a lot of paperwork to do." The SUV peeled away, leaving the broken gavel and the broken judge in the dust, a testament to the fact that justice, while sometimes slow, is always watching. The flash of the mugshot camera was blinding, a harsh white strobe that seemed to burn away the last shreds of Harrison P. Sterling's dignity. He wasn't Your Honor anymore. He was inmate Dahashaksak 8 The booking process at the Federal Detention Center was a methodical, dehumanizing ritual that Sterling had forced thousands of men to endure, but he had never imagined experiencing it himself. He was stripped of his bespoke suit, his silk tie, and the gold Rolex that had been a bribe from the prison contractors. In their place, he was handed a rough orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. It was 2 sizes too small, pulling tight across his stomach, a poetic mirror of the ill-fitting clothes he had mocked Marcus for wearing just 24 hours earlier. "Turn to the left," the intake officer barked. "Do you know who I am?" Sterling spat, though his voice trembled. "I am a personal friend of the governor. 1 phone call, and you'll be parking cars for a living." The officer didn't even look up from his computer. "You don't get phone calls yet, inmate. Face the wall. Spread your legs. Cough." The humiliation was absolute. The interrogation. 2 days later, Sterling sat in a steel interrogation room. He was handcuffed to the table. The air was frigid, federal standard temperature, designed to keep suspects uncomfortable and alert. The door buzzed and swung open. Marcus Thorne walked in. He looked impeccable. The homeless drifter guise was long gone. Marcus wore a navy 3-piece suit that cost more than Sterling's car. He carried a thick file folder, which he dropped onto the metal table with a heavy thud. Marcus didn't sit. He paced slowly around the room, letting the silence stretch until Sterling began to sweat. "You can't hold me here," Sterling finally snapped, trying to summon his old authority. "My lawyer will have this thrown out. It was entrapment. You provoked me." Marcus stopped pacing and leaned in close. "Entrapment requires me to plant the idea of the crime in your head, Harrison. All I did was stand at a bus stop. You did the rest. You profiled me. You denied me bail based on bias. You conspired with the DA to violate my civil rights." Marcus opened the file. "But that's just the tip of the iceberg. See, while you were busy playing King of Oak Creek, My forensic accountants were busy tearing apart your life." He slid a glossy photo across the table. It showed a luxury villa in the Cayman Islands. "Beautiful house," Marcus said. "Purchased 3 years ago by HPS Consulting, a shell company registered to your wife. The funds came directly from the Sunrise Private Correctional Group. That's a kickback, Harrison. That's federal wire fraud and money laundering. That's 20 years right there." Sterling paled. "My wife? She has nothing to do with this." "She's in the room next door," Marcus lied smoothly, a standard interrogation tactic, "and she's telling us everything to save herself." You wouldn't." "I don't have to," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You did this. You built a pipeline, Harrison. You took poor kids like Billy, kids who made one mistake, and you fed them into the private prison system for cash. You sold their futures to pay for your vacation home. You are a slave trader in a judge's robe." Sterling slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. I can cut a deal. I know things. I know about the senator. I know about the zoning board." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we'll take your information. But there is no deal for you. You're not the witness, Harrison. You're the trophy." The trial of the century. The trial of United States versus Harrison P. Sterling began 4 months later in the Federal District Court of Chicago. The venue had been moved due to the overwhelming publicity. The video of Marcus's arrest had gone viral, racking up 50 million views worldwide. The world wanted to see the tyrant fall. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from every major network lined the back rows. In the gallery sat the victims, dozens of them, men and women who had been wrongfully imprisoned, exorbitant bail set against them, their lives ruined by Sterling's gavel. Presiding was Judge Evelyn Stone, a terrifyingly competent jurist with zero tolerance for corruption. The prosecution's case was a sledgehammer. They didn't just use the video of Marcus, they brought out the ghosts of Sterling's past. The star witness wasn't Marcus. It was Leonard Vance, the former district attorney. Vance had flipped immediately, terrified of prison time. "Mr. Vance," the federal prosecutor asked, "can you explain the Thursday lunch arrangement?" Vance, sweating through his suit, spoke into the microphone. "Every Thursday, Judge Sterling and I would meet with the representatives from the Sunrise Detention Center. We would go over the docket. Sterling would identify defendants who had no family, no resources. Low-hanging fruit, he called them. We agreed to set impossible bail. If they couldn't pay, they went to Sunrise. For every head we sent, the facility paid a consulting fee to our shell companies." A collective gasp went through the jury. The cruelty was industrialized. Then came the victims. Billy stepped onto the stand. He looked cleaner, healthier, but his hands shook. "He told me I was trash," Billy whispered, wiping a tear. "I stole a wrench. I tried to give it back. Judge Sterling set my bail at $20,000. I spent 6 months in Sunrise. I was beaten. I was hurt bad in there. I missed my mum's funeral because he wouldn't grant me a furlough." Sterling, sitting at the defense table, refused to look at Billy. He stared at the table, his jaw clenched. But the real drama came when the defense presented their case. Sterling's high-priced lawyer, a man named Arthur Kane, tried to argue that Sterling was a tough-on-crime jurist who was being unfairly targeted by the liberal media and federal overreach. "My client," Kane argued, "is a pillar of the community who made the streets safe." Sterling, arrogant to the bitter end, leaned over and whispered to his lawyer, "Put me on the stand." "Absolutely not," Kane hissed. "That is suicide." "I can charm them," Sterling insisted, his narcissism blinding him to reality. "I can explain. These people are sheep. I just need to speak." Against his attorney's advice, Harrison Sterling took the stand. It was the mistake Marcus had been waiting for. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Elena Ross, stood up for cross-examination. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She just surgically removed his soul. "Mr. Sterling," Ross began, "you referred to Special Agent Thorne as a menace and a thug before you knew his identity. Why?" "He looked the part," Sterling said defensively. "He was dirty. He was loitering." "He was standing at a bus stop," Ross corrected. "Is poverty a crime in your worldview?" "It indicates character," Sterling snapped, losing his cool. "People who work hard don't look like that. I have an instinct for criminals. I can smell them." "And yet," Ross said, gesturing to the defense table, "you didn't smell the corruption on yourself?" "I am a judge," Sterling roared, slamming his hand on the witness stand rail. "I kept order. I did what had to be done to keep the scum off the streets. You think you're better than me. You sit in your ivory towers while I dealt with the filth every single day." The courtroom went silent. Sterling was breathing heavy, red-faced. He had just called the citizens of his own county filth on federal record. Ross smiled. No further questions. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a retired schoolteacher, didn't look at Sterling. "On count 1, racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, guilty. On count 3, civil rights violations, guilty." The guilts rained down like hammer blows. 24 counts, 24 guilty verdicts. Sterling sat frozen. His entire reality had shattered. He wasn't the law anymore. He was a felon. The sentencing. 2 months later, the sentencing hearing was held. This was the moment of reckoning. Marcus Thorne sat in the front row, his face impassive. He wasn't there to gloat. He was there to witness the completion of the mission. Judge Stone read through the pre-sentencing report. She took off her glasses and looked down at Sterling, who was now shackled at the waist and ankles. "Harrison Sterling," Judge Stone began, her voice echoing in the cavernous room, "you were entrusted with the most sacred power a democracy can give an individual, the power to judge others. You were supposed to be the shield that protected the innocent. Instead, you became the sword that struck them down." She picked up a piece of paper. "You targeted the poor because they couldn't fight back. You targeted minorities because you believed they were lesser. You turned a court of law into a marketplace of human misery. There is no rehabilitation for arrogance of this magnitude. There is only punishment." Judge Stone leaned forward. "For the crimes of racketeering, fraud, and the systematic deprivation of civil rights, I sentence you to a total of 65 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons." Sterling gasped. 65 years. He was 61. It was a death sentence. "Furthermore," Judge Stone continued, "I am ordering the immediate seizure of all assets held by you and your wife, the Cayman Villa, the house in Oak Creek, your pension. It is all forfeited. The proceeds will go into a restitution fund for your victims. You will enter prison penniless, Mr. Sterling, just like the men you mocked." "No!" Sterling screamed, struggling against his chains. "You can't do this. I am a judge. I demand an appeal. I am the law." 2 U.S. Marshals grabbed him by the arms. As they dragged him out, he looked wild, his eyes searching the room for a friendly face. He found none. His eyes locked with Marcus Thorne's. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply nodded, a final, silent acknowledgement that the balance had been restored. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off Sterling's screams. The aftermath. 6 months after the sentencing, Marcus drove his rental car back into Oak Creek. The town felt different. The oppressive weight that had hung over the streets was gone. There were new banners on the lampposts, advertising a community legal aid fair. Marcus pulled up to the diner near the courthouse. He walked in and took a seat at the counter. The door chimed, and a young man walked in wearing mechanic's coveralls. It was Billy. He looked transformed, stronger, happier, with grease on his hands that spoke of honest work, not despair. Billy spotted Marcus and froze. Then a wide grin broke across his face. He rushed over. "Agent Thorne," Billy said. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "Just passing through, Billy," Marcus said, shaking the young man's hand. "How's life?" "It's good," Billy said. "Real good. I finished my certification. I'm working at the auto shop on Main. And my dad, he got his truck back. The restitution check from the Sterling Fund cleared last week. We paid off the debt." "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus said. "You know," Billy said, his voice lowering. "They turned the old courthouse basement, the cells where you and I were, they turned it into a record archive. No one gets locked up down there anymore. The new judge, Judge Patel, she actually listens. She let my buddy go on a signature bond yesterday because he had a job interview." Marcus smiled. "That's how it's supposed to work." Billy paused, looking at Marcus with deep respect. "You risked a lot coming here, pretending to be, you know, a nobody." "I was never a nobody, Billy," Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee. "And neither were you. Sterling just couldn't see it. That was his crime. He thought a man's value was in his wallet or his skin color." Marcus stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the counter. "You stay out of trouble, Billy." "Yes, sir. Always." Marcus walked out of the diner and into the bright afternoon sun. He walked past the bus stop where it had all began. He paused for a moment, looking at the bench. He tapped his earpiece. "Thorne here. Status update." "Agent Thorne," his handler's voice crackled in his ear. "We have a situation in Louisiana. A sheriff running a shakedown operation on interstate truckers. We need an undercover operator. Someone who looks like a long-haul driver, down on his luck." Marcus grinned. He loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. "I'm on my way," Marcus said. "Tell them the poor trucker is coming." He got into his car and drove away, leaving Oak Creek behind. The town was healed, the tyrant was rotting in a cell, and the scales of justice were balanced once more. But the road was long, and there were always more monsters hiding behind badges, and Marcus Thorne was the hunter who would never stop coming for them. This story proves that while corruption may sit on a high throne, it stands on a foundation of sand. Harrison Sterling thought his power was absolute, but he forgot that true power lies in truth, justice, and the courage to stand up when everyone else looks away. Marcus Thorne didn't just win a case, he restored faith in the idea that no one is above the law. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and justice served, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who needs to see a bully get what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.